This is year one, generation one, and the person speaking is Octavo. The war had begun long before we arrived because war was their way of life. It took its first victims among us before we understood what was happening on an evening that seemed quiet. But even then, we knew we could easily be in danger. My wife Paula shook her head as she left the radio hut in the plaza of our little village. There's too much interference again. I'll try one more time, but if they don't answer, we'll start a search. An hour ago, 3 women had gone to pick fruit. They had not come back, they were not answering their radio, and the sun had sunk almost to the top of the hills. Around us, tiny lizards in the trees had begun their evening hoots and chimes. 9-legged crabs silently hunted the lizards. The breeze smelled bittersweet, perhaps from something in bloom. I should have known what, but I did not. Yuri and I were fixing an irrigation pump, but I knew his mind was on one of the women, Ninia. He had just begun living with her, and he was squinting up the path through the fields where she had gone. Paula went back to her work at a rough-hewn table nearby, trying to make sense of weather data. She took a deep breath and stretched her stiff back. We all struggled with the hot, stronger gravity. Finally, she entered the radio hut again. Everyone stopped what they were doing and listened. The hut's walls were from panels scavenged from a landing pod, and the roof was tree bark, so sound carried. Hello? Ninia? Z? Carrie? Hello? This is Paula. Do you hear me? Ninia? Z? Carrie? Are you there? Hello? She came out to the plaza. Maybe the batteries died again. Let's go look for them. She kept her voice reassuring as she asked Ramona to bring a medical kit and Merle to carry a radio and microphone to listen for emergency whistles. We would also need people to carry 3 stretchers and someone to bring a weapon. Standard operating procedure. Yuri picked up his rifle. We set off westward up the steady slope of a meadow toward a white line of vines and trees a kilometer away, hiking as fast as we could. We passed a long field that we had planted with a native grass resembling Earth's wild wheat, whose green shoots stood almost ankle high. The air smelled of moist soil. But the presence of wheat worried me. The wheat was a lot like earth grass, and if there was grass, then there were grazers, maybe animals like gazelle, or moose, or elephant. And if there were grazers, then something hunted them. So far, we had only seen small browsers and predators like little land crabs with trilateral symmetry, but we had found bits of big crab shells and of big stone-shelled land corals with stinging tentacles. None of us went barefoot anywhere. Yuri and Merle took the lead, pointing at tussocks of dry grass or bright coral bushes where something could hide and leap out. Lizards fled at our approach, moving lightning fast. In heavier gravity, things fell faster, and animals moved faster. We humans were slow and ignorant, still aliens. I saw a burrow and aimed a flashlight into it. Something inside barked, and we all jumped. We were panting and sweating when we reached the west edge of the meadow, where a vine-filled thicket formed a wall 1 kilometer wide and several kilometers long. Slim gray-bark trees that resembled aspens grew 2 stories high. Their leaves wilted from a lack of water, a dry season or a drought. Paula was not sure. Around them, looped tangles of snow-white vines jointed like bamboo that bore dangling thorns and grew so densely that we could barely see inside. Another snow vine thicket rose on the east side of the meadow just behind our village. Finding crops had kept me too busy to investigate the thickets carefully, but I had learned that the vines parasitized the trees. These vines had also kept away hunger. Shortly after we landed, orange fruit like translucent persimmons had ripened quickly on the east vines and had recently appeared on the west vines. The fruit had tested safe, contained plenty of vitamin C, and tasted like cantaloupe. The women had been to these vines. To the left, we could see ripe fruit close by, but to the right, the vines had been picked clean. We had a long way to search, but the sunset was throwing a golden light over everything, reminding us with every glance how late it was. We could not pause to catch our breath. Yuri turned his energy outward as we hurried on. He prowled up to a tall, blue-leafed shrub as if an ambush awaited on the other side. He paused dramatically, then dashed around it, recounting out loud the events of a war game he had played with the Russian army. Abruptly, he fell silent. I began to run even before we heard him howl. 3 women lay on the other side of the shrub, baskets of snow fruit set down beside them. Yuri yelled at Ninia's name and fell to his knees. He fumbled at her throat for a pulse. I lifted Z's wrist. It was cold and limp. Carrie stared sleepily ahead, and a pair of tiny vines climbed on her eyeball. I gagged and turned away. But we had expected something far worse. I had tried to prepare myself for dismembered bodies, perhaps half-eaten, or disfigured by giant coral strings. Evidence of attack and predation in the battle for survival. The women seemed to have fallen asleep. They had peaceful deaths. This was wrong. We looked around, frightened and silent. Something had killed without an obvious motive or method. "Let's bring them home," Paula said, her voice low and steady. We began to assemble the stretchers.